You could hear a pin drop when 6-year-old Lily Thompson stepped into the courtroom, her tiny boots echoing against the marble floor, one hand gripping the leash of Max, a scarred German shepherd with eyes that had seen too much. Every head turned. Every breath paused. She wasn't just a child anymore. She was a survivor carrying silent truths no adult in that room dared speak. Max moved with her like a shadow, alert and steady, and just as Lily climbed onto the witness stand, something happened, something that would shift the entire trial. But before that moment there was the fear, the silence, the day Lily stopped speaking forever, until Max. They say trauma steals voices, but for Lily Thompson it stole something deeper, the sparkle in her eyes, the freedom in her laugh, the childhood she once danced through without fear. Just weeks before that haunting courtroom scene, she was a joyful 6-year-old who sang to birds and told long, winding stories to her dolls in the backyard of their quiet Montana home. It was the kind of place people moved to feel safe. But one sunny afternoon changed everything. Lily had been playing near the lilac bushes, her favorite hiding spot during imaginary fairy hunts, when a stranger appeared at the edge of their property. He smiled, warm, practiced, too smooth. "Hey there," he said, crouching beside her. "I've got a litter of puppies in my van. Want to help me pick one out?" She didn't answer. She froze. And in that moment, something primal in her tiny body knew this wasn't safe. Her mother, Karen, had stepped inside for just 5 minutes. 5 minutes to check on the pie in the oven. But when she returned and saw her daughter face to face with a man she'd never seen before, her scream tore through the afternoon silence like a thunderclap. "Lily!" she cried. The man flinched, then grabbed at the girl's wrist. That's when Lily's instincts kicked in. She pulled back, stumbled toward the porch as tires screeched and the man vanished. Since that day, Lily hadn't said a single word, not to her parents, not to the officers, not even in her dreams. Her world had shrunk to silence. And as the days passed, the fear in her eyes only deepened, until someone suggested something unusual. A therapy dog, a retired K9 with a wounded past of his own. That's when Max entered her life, and everything started to change. You wouldn't believe it unless you saw it yourself. The way a broken child reached out to a broken dog, and somehow they began to heal each other. Lily hadn't spoken in nearly 3 weeks. The silence in their home was heavy, heartbreaking. Her parents tried everything: coloring books, bedtime stories, her favorite blueberry pancakes. Nothing worked. She wouldn't eat unless someone sat next to her, wouldn't sleep unless every door was locked. She flinched at the sound of tires on gravel. Something deep inside her had shut down. That's when Karen and her husband, Mark, found Dr. Laura Whitman, a behaviorist who worked with therapy dogs and trauma survivors. She introduced them to Max, a retired K9 who'd once taken down a suspect during a hostage rescue. The price? A jagged scar down his side and a limp in his step. He wasn't useful anymore, at least not by police standards. But Laura saw something in him, and so did Lily. The first meeting was quiet. No barking, no pushing. Max simply sat across the room, watching her with eyes that had known pain. Slowly, Lily stepped forward. Inch by inch, she stretched out her hand. Max didn't move, just waited. And then her fingers touched his fur. That's when it happened. A soft inhale, a shift in her posture. For the first time since the attack, Lily looked up. From that day on, they were inseparable. Where Lily went, Max followed. He slept beside her bed, guarded the porch, and stood between her and every shadow. She still didn't speak, not yet, but something was changing. And none of them knew it yet, but this bond, it would lead them both back into a courtroom, where Max would do something no human could, What happened next would leave an entire courtroom breathless, and it all started with a flick of a little girl's fingers. By the time Lily and Max returned to the courthouse, months had passed since the attempted abduction. The trial had gained national attention, with cameras parked outside and headlines filled with speculation. The accused, Daniel Reed, sat calmly at the defense table. A man with no criminal record, no confession, and no physical evidence tying him to the crime. His lawyer knew one thing: Lily couldn't speak. And without her testimony, the case was hanging by a thread. But no one counted on Max. Lily walked into that courtroom gripping Max's leash like it was the only thing keeping her afloat. When she was seated on the witness stand, her body trembled. The prosecutor spoke gently, not asking questions, just giving her space. Then, Lily did something no one expected. She raised her hand and made a subtle sign. A movement she'd learned in therapy. Max saw it instantly. He snapped to attention. His ears perked. His body stiffened. And then came the growl, low, guttural, unmistakable. His eyes locked onto Reed with a clarity that pierced the entire room. Gasps echoed from the gallery. The judge leaned forward, stunned. This wasn't just a therapy dog reacting to stress. This was something deeper. Max recognized him, and in that moment everything changed. The silence was over. The truth was coming. Whether spoken or not, you could almost feel it. The moment when a growl from an old police dog shook the very foundation of a courtroom built on logic and doubt. Judge Harold Brennan had seen hundreds of cases in his 25 years on the bench, but nothing like this. As Max growled and locked eyes with Daniel Reed, the atmosphere turned electric. The gallery leaned forward. The prosecutor froze mid-sentence. Even Reed, so smug moments earlier, went pale. This wasn't a random reaction. It was targeted, intentional. The judge's gavel came down sharply. "Recess," he ordered, but his voice betrayed the urgency bubbling beneath the surface. Outside the courtroom, Lily clung to Max, burying her face into his fur. Her mother, Karen, whispered softly, "Sweetheart, are you okay?" But Lily didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her silence, once a sign of trauma, now held power. Inside the courthouse walls, something was shifting. The defense team grew nervous. The prosecution began digging harder. And just when everyone thought Max had given them all he could, a new lead emerged. Soil samples from Reed's van, long dismissed as irrelevant, were retested. This time, they matched a remote hunting cabin nearly 200 miles away. A cabin police had no reason to search until now. The judge granted a 24-hour recess for investigators to follow the trail. As the team loaded up to head north, Max jumped into the back of the SUV without hesitation, his tail still, his nose twitching. He knew. He absolutely knew. What they would find inside that cabin would not only confirm everything Max had sensed, but would change the course of the trial forever. You could almost feel it. The moment when a growl from an old police dog shook the very foundation of a courtroom built on logic and doubt. Judge Harold Brennan had seen hundreds of cases in his 25 years on the bench, but nothing like this. As Max growled and locked eyes with Daniel Reed, the atmosphere turned electric. The gallery leaned forward. The prosecutor froze mid-sentence. Even Reed, so smug moments earlier, went pale. This wasn't a random reaction. It was targeted, intentional. The judge's gavel came down sharply. "Recess," he ordered, but his voice betrayed the urgency bubbling beneath the surface. Outside the courtroom, Lily clung to Max, burying her face into his fur. Her mother, Karen, whispered softly, "Sweetheart, are you okay?" But Lily didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her silence, once a sign of trauma, now held power. Inside the courthouse walls, something was shifting. The defense team grew nervous. The prosecution began digging harder. And just when everyone thought Max had given them all he could, a new lead emerged. Soil samples from Reed's van, long dismissed as irrelevant, were retested. This time, they matched a remote hunting cabin nearly 200 miles away. A cabin police had no reason to search until now. The judge granted a 24-hour recess for investigators to follow the trail. As the team loaded up to head north, Max jumped into the back of the SUV without hesitation, his tail still, his nose twitching. He knew. He absolutely knew. What they would find inside that cabin would not only confirm everything Max had sensed, but would change the course of the trial forever. He didn't flinch when the charges were read. He didn't blink when the jury entered. But when Max stood up, walked across the courtroom and growled at him once more, Daniel Reed finally broke. The news of Abby Morales' rescue spread like wildfire. Her survival was nothing short of a miracle. The prosecution moved fast, introducing fresh evidence. Tire tracks matching Reed's van, soil samples linking him to the cabin, and, most damning of all, DNA on the basement chains. It wasn't speculation anymore, it was fact. Still, Reed sat there, blank-faced, his fingers tapping nervously, until Max rose again. This time, the German Shepherd didn't bark, he didn't lunge, he simply stared, unblinking, unshaken as if to say, "I remember you." The silence in the courtroom was electric. The jury watched. The judge leaned forward. And Reed. He whispered something to his lawyer, who immediately stood. "Your Honor, my client would like to change his plea." Gasps filled the room. The judge's gavel slammed. "Mr. Reed, are you confirming a guilty plea?" Reed nodded. "Yes," he said, voice trembling. "I did it." In that moment, justice didn't come in a fiery speech or dramatic reveal. It came in the quiet stillness of a child's courage and the unwavering gaze of a dog who never forgot. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the courthouse emptied, Lily sat outside on the steps, her small hands wrapped around Max's neck. She looked into his eyes, leaned close, and whispered her first full sentence since the day it all began. "You saved me." Her parents wept quietly nearby, and Max. He simply closed his eyes, rested his head in her lap, and let out the softest sigh, as if he already knew his mission was complete. This story reminds us that healing doesn't always begin with words. It begins with trust, patience, and connection. In a world that often moves too fast, it's easy to overlook the quiet signs of pain or the silent cries for help. But sometimes the greatest strength lies in simply being present. Like Max, who didn't need to speak to protect, to comfort, to love. For older generations, this tale speaks to the enduring power of loyalty, the wisdom of instinct, and the truth that it's never too late to be a source of light in someone else's darkness.